to a video.
10. Sorry guys. We're going to react to 10 true story
Confused stories.
Oh,
wait, let me say 10 true stories. No, 10 true scary confused stories.
Okay.
Number 1. Here's a story that, even when I think about it now and look back, it's still really hard to explain. If anybody has any idea what it could be, or maybe help me come up with some sort of explanation, that would be amazing. Anyways, here's how it goes. Every 2 weeks, I'd always go out into these cornfields. It was beautiful. I'd always go horseback riding with my friends, and it was always nice. At the time,
Okay, I'm sorry guys, my brother just went to close the door. But we forgot to tell you. I am Isaac's sister.
Yep.
And I'm going to do some video too with him.
And sometimes she will vlog me, and sometimes I will vlog her.
No, but I really don't really want to vlog myself because I look so ugly. Is that true?
Who want me?
I'll see you right now.
Hello?
Okay, whatever, guys.
Let's
I'm
just get
going to
ready.
do some makeup on his channel because I don't have a channel. I'm so mad. I don't have a
No,
channel.
because she deleted her channel because
Yeah.
she didn't want her to do it. And
Yeah.
then she wants to do it now, but she forgot to do it, so I did my channel.
So yeah, subscribe this video if you like it and like.
And share the
Oh wait,
video.
I make a mistake. Like this video if you like it. Subscribe this video because we are going to do a lot of vlogs now, or different videos, reaction, something like that.
Make sure you share it too.
To friends, family, because we are a family that are Mexico actually. I am America, my best is America, and another brother is America, and my big sister,
I don't like my another
she's
baby.
from Mexico, and so you're going to hear a lot of bad words from my mom because she's Mexican, she's mad of everyone, you know.
But I could just hide the camera when it goes outside. I could just do this. And you cannot see, and you come out too, because you're going to vlog me. Okay?
And yesterday was the last day of school. I'm so happy. But
Okay, let's
one
get
thing
right.
that I don't like is summer school. I'm
I
going.
like summer school, but I never went to summer school. Okay,
When is so fun?
let's get right into it. Sorry about
I was in college, but this was an awesome way to get away from studying. In order to get there, I had to drive through some dark roads, through miles of cornfields in the evening. Since I had school during the daytime, it was the only time I was able to go. It was late fall, so by 5 p.m. it was already dark. Every 2 weeks I would drive out there. I'd had a few different experiences on the long roads with the cornfields. First of all, every time I drove out there, I'd always see these strange lights in the sky. I just thought that maybe they were planes or something. But when I started noticing they were always different colors, I began to wonder. You see, anytime I went out there, I would always see them. I talked to other people about it, and they told me they'd experienced similar things. Although it was nice knowing that other people are experiencing similar things, I couldn't help but feel nervous. One night it was really dark. I was the only car on the road. Suddenly in front of me, a few miles away, I can see what appears to be a bright light. It was rectangular, sort of like a big door or something. Of course, I thought maybe there was a large vehicle or something, so I tried to ignore it. Honestly, I pretty much just wrote it off. I said that it was most likely just my imagination, so I continued on. Even though I was continuing on, I really couldn't help but notice the light. I mean, it was still there. Anyways, moving on. So I keep driving, and eventually, there's a car behind me. I really didn't think too much about it. After all, even though these back roads are rarely traveled, it could just be that somebody else decided to use this road. Now, everything would have been fine, but here's what happens next. As I'm driving, I start noticing the car's acting strange. Soon, the car ends up stopping. When I look back at it now, it turned out that the battery was but at the time, I had no idea what was going on. This only car that was
Well, how did he know that he didn't went over there? But he
Yeah,
had
how did the man know that he was there?
and no, the car didn't have battery. That's that. I don't know. Probably he think
I think he didn't have like gas or something.
he think it don't have gas, but
It does have gas.
but we don't know. There's a person inside the car. So yeah. I'm sorry guys.
I'm sorry, it was loud.
there ends up going right by me. But since they didn't notice me having the problems earlier, there really wasn't much they can do. Well, here I was, stuck in the middle of nowhere with nothing but corn all around me. It was such a strange feeling. Being out here in the middle of nowhere with nobody around here, it was something I won't really forget anytime soon. Left with no other options, I decided to get on my phone and see if I can call somebody. Maybe somebody can pick me up. I was able to call my parents, thankfully, since they're about 20 minutes away. They told me they'd get there as soon as possible. So even though I knew my parents were on the way, I couldn't help but feel this strange sensation. Almost that feeling like you're being watched. Still, there's really not much I can do.
I always think that someone's watching me. Right now I think someone's watching me is my dog. I have a lot. Not a lot of dogs, but I had 3 dogs. Wait for me.
So I just stayed inside the car and waited for my parents. There was
I always feel like someone's watching me here in this room.
Yeah, me too. I always
And I think it's haunted because one day,
like a door closed.
yeah, by itself.
But the window was closed.
Yeah, but it's not even windy.
It was one day, but I think
It was not windy. It was summer, and it was really hot that day.
it's haunted. God, room is haunted.
Yeah.
really not that much sound out there. All I could hear were the crickets and the sound of the wind outside. I'll tell you, those were the longest 20 minutes I've ever had to wait. I'd say I'm about 15 or so minutes in, so maybe my parents would be there soon. When I started to see another light off in the distance, thinking it was my parents, I got in my car and I waited for my parents to arrive. That's when I noticed something. As the car was approaching, I knew now it wasn't my parents' car. In fact, I almost recognized it. When I looked closer, this was the car that passed by me earlier. I could see the man inside, and he was slowly driving right beside me. Once he passes me, he ends up parking right behind my car. I had no idea what was going on. Here I was once again, like I mentioned, in the middle of nowhere. Now there's this other person with me. Who knows, maybe he decided that he wanted to come help me. But remember, he never noticed that my car was having problems until after he went away. So how exactly did he know? Honestly, I just thought it was him. But when I see somebody step out of the passenger side, I knew he wasn't alone. They then start walking up to me really slowly. Normally, when somebody needs help, you're gonna introduce yourself and offer something. But the way they slowly walked up to me with these strange smiles on their faces was definitely telling me otherwise. I jumped into my car. I made sure to lock my doors and windows. As soon as they walk up to the car, they start scratching and knocking on the car. I know now that these people were not up to any good. There I was alone, frozen, not knowing what to do. Honestly, I was hoping the car doors wouldn't open. What was supposed to be about a couple minutes felt like it lasted forever. Finally, off in the distance, I could see some other lights. As the vehicle got closer, I noticed now that it was my parents. As soon as these two men see the lights, they run right back the car. Now, instead of doing what you might think they might do, as in they drive away and leave us alone, they still sat there in their car watching us. My parents finally arrive, and we end up deciding to get the car back in the morning. As we're making our way out of the fields, they're now starting to follow us. Great. Here I thought that was the end of everything. They end up following us for about 20 minutes, and as soon as we leave the cornfields, they end up stopping. They don't follow us anymore, and they end up turning back and going back the other way. We do eventually make it back home, but I can't stop thinking about my experience. Along with my father and his friends, we end up going to get my car. We never did find it. We looked everywhere around those fields, but it was to be found. I did talk to some of my father's friends who were officers, but even they couldn't find the car. So, there it is. We were never to find the car, and we never did see those two people again. I'm not sure and what they wanted, but I'm just glad I never have to see them again. Number 2. First one is my... Here's some back...
For number 2, I always feel like at night, every time we go like somewhere at night with my family, and I stand in the back sometimes with my brother, this brother right now, I would feel like a car is always following us. I'll always look.
I think like someone is like spying on us.
I don't know. No, not really.
Cause I think that, cause I always like watch like something like scary at night.
Okay.
Not all the time, sometimes.
But I always look at the window outside of the car and see a car following us. And one time, I was looking out the window because I feel like someone's following us.
Yeah, sometimes they go to the, like. Sometimes they like. We think that they're following us because they're maybe going like somewhere like almost next
To us,
but
going.
we're right here. You see this? I know you don't think, but you see this? When we go this way, then he goes like another way. And I thought he was following us.
Yeah.
Ground. My father's family...
My brother knows it, but I always feel like someone's watching our family. So one time, I'm going to tell you what, I was looking at the window, and this car was keep following us until we arrived to our Target to buy something or look somewhere there to find what to buy. We went and set up the car, stopped, and went to the next store. And then after 5 minutes, or not 5 minutes, I don't know what I'm talking about, but 1 minute ago, I went inside Target, and we were there like about 10 minutes, not very long, and then after we get out, we went to the car, and this car keep following us, and then we went somewhere to eat, and that car left. And that was the time that I saw the car went away. So I was so freaking out. I don't know what's the reason they were following us. So yeah. Let's get number 2 started.
He lived on an old farmhouse from the late 1960s until 2001. That's when they moved. The house was built around the 1930s. It was 2 stories, and my aunt lived in the side bedroom. We pretty much lived in the middle of nowhere. Around us were cornfields and woods off in the distance. I lived there when I was younger, but I never had any strange things happen to me. The house is now long gone, and there's now a pond there. It sat right next to a Walmart. Anyway, my aunt told me this story about a year ago. It's always stayed in my mind. When my aunt went to high school, both my parents worked, and played football. So every day she'd go home to an empty house. One day she went up to her room, she closed the door and started listening to music. A few minutes go by, when all of a sudden she starts hearing some noises off in the distance. That was then followed by somebody saying, "Hey, turn that music down." Of course, she turned the music off, and she remembers looking out the window. She can see my dad off in the distance, and this was well before the time either grandparents would be home. I do remember one time after we moved out of the house, we went back to make sure we had all of our belongings. I remember going up the stairs with this strange feeling. The house just felt different. That was that story. But here's one from last summer. It's something I still can't explain. As a side note, this friend isn't the same as my other stories. Her house is around 15 years old. It's on land surrounded by cornfields. She wanted to know if I could watch her cat because her family went away for a week. I agreed. I've done this plenty of times before, so honestly, it was no problem. Yesterday was the last full day that my friend and her family would be gone. I myself had just gotten back from a one-day camping trip. I drove about 2 hours home earlier. I was absolutely tired, but I made the 2-minute trip to their house to feed the cat. I've known this family since before they moved into the house, and practically, I pretty much live with them in the summertime. I remember always running around in the summertime. It was a lot of fun. I know a lot of about that place, though. Here's the thing. A lot of strange things do happen there. Things that I can't explain. I think what happened to me takes the cake. I'm amazed at how surprised I got compared to my other experiences there. I was in the field laying next to the cat. All of a sudden, she gets up and runs to the house. Me feeling tired, I just decided to stay there in the field. I closed my eyes for a little bit, but when the cat came back, I noticed something. When I looked off into the field, I can see a man standing there off in the distance. He appeared to be holding something. The only thing was that since he was so far away, I really couldn't tell what it was. I got up right away, and in time, I run inside the house and close all the doors and windows. I then stopped around outside, but when I looked outside, I no longer could see him. I made sure to get on the phone and call a dispatcher, but when they sent some people out there, they didn't find anybody. These are some of the experiences I've had so far. I'm sure but for now, that's it.
That is so creepy. That's so
I think I know. I'm thinking about it. Making my own imagination. Like I put it like this photo, like it sounds like that.
Number 3. Before I
Let me tell you something. One time, like me, my mom, and me, no, my dad and my mom and me, we were going to church. No one went. My brother and my sister didn't went. Just me, my mom and dad. We passed by Boba. It's Boba time. The store called. I think you guys know. And I saw this guy with a knife, and a lot of people was next to it. I was really creepy, and after me and the car passed through it, another car passed there. After the car passed next to us, like the guy followed our car. I don't know where, but proof, proof that it was not us, because I was going to be terrified. That guy was following us. So yeah.
start, I want to give you some details. That way I can explain the area that's all happened. My parents live in a rural area. That means lots of cornfields. This happened near one like 5 minutes from their house. The only thing down the road was an abandoned building. A building that's been there for a time. I think that's what makes this story even more interesting. Part of the field has now been sold, so some of it is off limits.
And this is the last story I'm going to share because we need to clean up the room. My mom is going to cut insect
Here's what happened. I was driving to my parents' house and it was almost midnight. On one side, there was cornfields. On the other side, there was a farm. I was about 3 minutes away from this abandoned building. At the time, I was also talking to my friend. He lived about an hour away from me. The thing was that he wasn't really paying attention to me. I think he was too busy playing video games or something. I go around a slight bend in the road, and I can see something in the cornfield near the edge of the road. That's when I see something that looks like a bobcat. But when I really think about it, it was definitely not the size of a cat. I'd say that it was more the size of a little bear. I don't know exactly what it was, so if anybody has any explanation, I really like it. But either way, as I'm going on by, there it is just looking right at me. So I go right by it. I turn to my left, and guess what? Following me. I wasn't really going that fast, so maybe that's why it was catching up to me. These were the back roads, and it was at night, so you can just imagine my reaction to seeing this thing. Remembering it now, I'd say it followed me for about a minute. When I made it to the abandoned building, it stopped. It stopped just a few feet away from the building. When I look back, I see this animal running off into the fields. I was telling my friend as all of this was happening, but he didn't seem to be interested. I told my parents, but of course, they laughed. They just said that it was most likely a cat or something. My sisters still laugh any time we drive that road together. Honestly, I don't like going, even if it is during the daytime. This all happens so fast. I'm pretty sure that's why it's so difficult to explain. But I know what I saw, and I know what I experienced. Number 4.
That's it of the video. It is 21 minutes. And that's really long. So, hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. So, I got to pass to my brother now.
Okay, if you